Don't worry about it. Okay. I was so busy telling people, oh, go ahead and take it off. They already know it's me. Just, yeah, there we go. Okay, sorry about all that. I was too busy explaining how to do it. We've got a one-man crew out there right now. Anyway, today's going to be an interesting show. As you know before, I might, between these two roll-ins, I'm going to have two roll-ins for the whole show. But basically, I've shown you what Alex Jones, has documented is what the globalists are doing for a globalist takeover. He sounds all alarmist and everything, but basically, that is the method that the globalist capitalists are using to take over. Now, see, back in the, I don't know, if you go back as far as the last Depression, they started making laws. They realized that capitalism was only good if you had it highly regulated, because otherwise it's like sharks eating the smaller fish until there are no smaller fish, and then they eat each other until there's only one big shark left. And we wanted to keep that away. That's not good for the economy for the little people. But the big guys wanted to keep making money, and that's what we're seeing the results of right now. Now I'm going to show you two different perspectives on that. One is from a socialist, Michael Parenti, and then we're going to follow that up with the viewpoint of a true capitalist oligarch, one of the richest guys in the world. And that's from a TED Talk, and we'll be showing that in its entirety. So I'm going to get started right now with this. Go ahead and just switch over to the movie, and I'll introduce it. There it goes. The Democracy. It's called Democracy and the Pathology of Wealth. This is, as it says there, from 2012, but this is a real interesting one. We're going to let this play for a while, and we'll come back just 22 minutes short of the end and play the TED Talk for you, and it'll just be an interesting perspective. It should be going. There, yeah, it's going.
It's even sort of funny here.
There we go. Without the hum. No, if you make it louder, it gets a hum. There's no way. They often, when I go to on these talks, they always say, "Do you need a PowerPoint? Do you need slides?" I said, "No. All I need is water, and a sound system that works." And sometimes I get the water, but that's about it. All right. Yeah, that's better. Thank you. You're good. I actually want to talk about something I call the pathology of wealth, or profit pathology. I've given it two names. And that's really what I'm going to be talking about mostly, because that's the thing that's really oppressing us and much of the world today. And capitalist ideology, and it does have an ideology, has numerous popular myths attached to it, what the anthropologists would call the Miranda and the Sacranda, the scenarios to be admired and the ones that are sacred, the stories that are sacred about its origin and its meaning. And the myth of capitalism has a lot of that. There's the myth of capitalism and social prosperity, that capitalism just brings social prosperity. Well, in fact, most of the world is capitalist and most of the world is poor. Don't talk about social prosperity to capitalist Nigeria. Don't talk about it to capitalist Honduras or capitalist Indonesia or any number of places. There's the other myth about capitalism and individual success and ready access to wealth for those who have the gumption and the get-go. Capitalism and the free market self-regulation, that one. That I'll be talking much more about that later on. Capitalism brings international trade and peace. You notice all the peace we've got in capital? I think I slept late one weekend and I missed the peace. and capitalism and its supposed symbiosis with democracy. And that's another thing I was going to talk about tonight, because the title is but you know, I've written about that one so long. I just thought I would just meander around on some of these other subjects. There's one common theme or myth when you launch into a critique of capitalism. It's the one I call the mom and pop litany. It's the people who then celebrate the entrepreneurial spirit and say, well, two people start a little business, and then it grows, and they employ some other people, and it's usually said in this sentimental, nostalgic, sing-song way and all that. And I think those are good, actually. I've been accused on the internet. You know, you get accused of everything on the internet. I've been accused of, some guy wrote, Parenti is soft on small business. In fact, I am. I think small businesses are okay, you know. But we're not talking about small businesses tonight. We're talking about giant corporations. As Lenin said about 100 years ago, you didn't know I was going to quote Lenin so early in the talk, huh? He was in one of his more hyperbolic moments, too. He said, 1 million small businesses count for nothing. A few giant cartels count for everything. They are what lay down the law. They are the thing that shape the face of the whole society and such. Well, so whenever I talk about capitalism, I'm not talking about mom and pop, but I'm talking about the big corporations, okay? The free market core mythology, to which both political parties in this country and just about all mainstream commentators are wedded to, argues in effect that, and here I'm kind of paraphrasing John Maynard Keynes, because he said this too about free market capitalism. The free market mythology, it argues that the most ruthless, selfish, opportunistic, greedy, calculating plunderers, applying the most heartless measures in cold-blooded pursuit of corporate interests and wealth accumulation, will produce the best results for all of us through something called the invisible hand. And Keynes really, he mocked that too. He didn't have as many adjectives as I did, but he said, how do they think that the most wicked, that was the word he used, the most wickedest people pursuing the most wickedest ends for the most wickedest means are going to produce these beautiful, what an interesting theory. Where the hell could they ever gotten it? Marx had 3 words to sum up the entire process of corporate capitalism. It was accumulate, accumulate, accumulate. And I like that quote because he's recognizing, he doesn't really go into it, he avoids psychology, and I usually do also, but I think it's time we have to treat some of these guys, put them on the couch or something. Since we can't put them on the guillotine, we have to, no, I didn't say that. He's giving this compulsive idea of accumulate, and what do you do after that? You accumulate. That's all they do, and that's all they need to do. Mindless, driven. It's a rational pathology. Are you still with me? Okay. The crimes and crises of corporate America are not, in my view, an irrational departure from a rational system. I don't think Bernie Madoff is an aberration. Quite the opposite. I think it's the converse. They are the rational outcomes of a basically irrational and amoral system. The multi-billion-dollar government bailouts are themselves turned into an opportunity for pillage. In other words, even when they've been stealing and they're getting money to compensate, they'll steal that money too. They'll steal from the contribution cup out there. Watch your property here. Not only does the state fail to regulate, it becomes itself a source of plunder. pulling vast sums from the federal money machine. We're exploited not only as workers, but as taxpayers and consumers. So if you work at, say, at a nonprofit and all that, that doesn't mean you're not exploited in this society. You're exploited as a citizen of the community. You're exploited, especially as a taxpayer. Who was it? Bacon. Which one? This is when you get old. You shouldn't stray from your notes. But some noted commentator who prefers not to be mentioned right now, he said, what the hell were we talking about? He said, it's happening to all of you too. I know. I remember now. The tax the public treasury is about the best investment that capitalists can make. They'll spend a few $1 million on lobbying and some campaign contributions, and then they'll get a contract for an oil reserve that's worth $20 billion. There's no investment you can make in the private business world of a few million and come out with $20 billion. And you can go on plundering and ripping off from the public treasure. It's about the best investment you can make is to buy politicians and then to buy the resources that belong to the people and walk off with it. These reactionaries who scold us for running to the government for a handout themselves run to the government for handouts. Why else would they have thousands of lobbyists? How many lobbyists do you have in Washington? Trying to scratch up. Be quiet. What do you mean? Some union or something? Is that trying to scratch up some money for you? How many lobbyists you have? I don't see any hands going up hardly. Corporate America yearly enjoys billions of dollars in subsidies, grants and aid, airwave licenses, loan guarantees, bailouts, tax breaks. You can go on. Export subsidies. With all the profits it pulls in every year, corporate America is on welfare, and we got to get them off welfare. The essence of free market corporate capitalism is the transformation of living nature into commodities and commodities into dead capital. So you take living nature and you get all these forms and you get it, and then you finally accumulate these abstract forms of wealth which are going to be answered. They're really all money and all treasury notes, all bonds, all stock. They're really sort of kind of promissory notes that there's a real world out there and value is going to keep getting created, and then this stuff I can cash it. I got these billions of dollars, you see. But it's kind of a depressive thing. It goes from living nature to this great amassing of dead capital. When left entirely on its own devices, capitalism foists its diseconomies and its toxicity upon the general public and upon the natural environment. And then it does an interesting thing. It eventually begins to devour itself. If the paladins of corporate America want to know what really threatens our way of life, it's their way of life. Their boundless way of pilfering the very community and environment that sustains them. And the more successful they are, the more deadly they become. Like any parasite. If it becomes too successful in its host, it does what? It kills the host, and it's going to be a catastrophe for the host, that's us, and for the parasite too. There's a myth that prosperity is shared by us all. More for them means more for me. I've heard that. I've interviewed people who say, well, the big company, if they create the jobs that and then there's something for me. We hear that a rising tide lifts all boats. You've heard that one, right? I always say a rising tide can sink a lot of ships and drown a lot of people. Still greater wealth for the very few. It means less and less for the rest of us. Now, what's been marvelous is this. What's been marvelous with the Occupy movement is that this has been part of the protest. This has actually been recognized. That they actually come out and they start talking about the 1% and the 99%. I think that's a beautiful division. It's much better than those stupid quintile studies used to get. The top 20% make 4 times more or 8 times more than the bottom. What does that mean? What the hell are you talking about? That's not wealth. You know who's in the top 20%? If you make over $75,000, $80,000, you're in the top 20%. You're rich. They say the wealthiest top 20%, the wealthiest quintile, the wealthiest 1/5 make this. No, you got to look at the very, very, very tiny. That one. It's really not even 1%. It's really a fraction of 1%. 1% is. You're talking about 3.5 million people. It isn't that many in the super rich. It's more like 1/10 of 1%. But let's say 1%. We'll give. I mean, because everybody in 1% is doing pretty well. To finally get, these people out there in a mass popular movement talking about the great class divide that some of us have been talking about for 40 years and been trying to get people to recognize, and finding that we're called extreme, we're called ideological. Our colleagues in academia would frown at us or smirk and snicker and say, oh, that's a Marxist view or this or that. To finally see people out in the street just coming right out and saying 1% and 99% and seeing it getting picked up by commentators. Let me say that's a big ideological victory right there. A victory in words. Now, at this recession that the 1% is presiding over is not such a bad deal for the 1%. They don't mind recessions. Capitalism has never minded recessions. Labor unions are tamed and even broken during recessions. Labor unions have to make concessions. Labor unions have to often go without contracts and such. Smaller business competitors are driven out or bought up for a tuppence, Marx said something about that. One capitalist will destroy many capitalists. You just eat them up. You can solidify your market, your field, and take over. Not just labor unions are tamed and broken, but people are tamed and broken. People suddenly get worried. They line up for jobs they never thought they'd have to work for, at wages they didn't know they were going to have to work for, and they have to get in there and work harder and harder for less and feel grateful that they got something going. And meanwhile, the profits stay pretty high for at least for a while. So I'll tell you what's bad for capitalism, and that's capitalism. It's always in a crisis. It's bad for us, but eventually it'll be bad for the capitalists. They have many opportunistic ways of taking advantage of all this. I'm just telling you right now with the recessions. But eventually there's a limit to that kind of thing. Recession has another useful feature. The plutocracy would prefer a population that is hungry and impoverished and will settle for less and less, that it must work harder for less. The plutocracy doesn't mind unemployment. They could live with it, The job providers, Bank of America. I was standing with my neighbor in a cafe. We were waiting in line, and I said, "So how's your friends, the corporations?" He said, "Hey, listen, Mike, the corporations are job providers. Isn't that the term they're using?" And this was like, I said, "Wait a minute. Yesterday I just heard on the radio yesterday, Bank of America laying off 30,000 people. That's not the way a job provider should act. It's pretty clear that they're doing what they want to do. And one of the things they don't want is they don't want the 99% to be educated, critically aware of their own interests, politically literate, have a strong sense of their own entitlement. That isn't the kind of population they want to deal with. able to organize and articulate the issues. That isn't what they want. They want us demoralized, they want us demobilized, and they want us disinformed. This also better enables them to pursue global accumulation, such as imperialism and such. Recession is no problem to imperialism. The empire is flourishing. I see people and some authors, a whole bunch of books are being, I wrote the book called The Face of Imperialism there, which takes to task these people who argue that it's all just for glory or it's all just for power. There are very real material interests involved in owning the whole world, and controlling it. And it's not just because we're overweening or we're inept or we're compulsive or we have a messianic save the world complex or something. No, we don't have, you might have that, but these guys running the thing are much smarter than you, and they know what they're doing. Michael, that's my name. How about we're going to have a question period afterwards, okay? It's only in Berkeley. Okay. The empire is stronger than ever. Obama is an imperialist. He is committed now to aerial warfare and attacks on other countries. I pity what is going to happen to Iran. There are commentators who've got it very mixed up. A few on RT that I saw not long ago. Oh, they'll never go into Iran. It's twice the size of Iraq. It's mountainous. It's got twice the population. They would need 1 million troops. They're not going to go in. The Air Force is all ready. They're going to do what they did to Yugoslavia. They're going to to Libya for the most part. They're going to destroy it from the air, hit every utility, hit every power station, hit every port, hit every transport center, and kill a lot of other people too. The U.S. Air Force has already announced that they have 10,000 targets in Iran. And former Joint Chief of Staff, he was on the Joint Chief, he just had started on there, Admiral Tommy Mullen, who got up and said, why are we bombing Iran? The Navy's against it and the Army's against it. It's the Air Force that's going to be their show, you see. So we're going to bomb Iran. There's 80 million people, all of them different, all of them human beings. What do we got to do bombing them? He was head of the Joint Chief of Staff. They gave him a gold watch and they retired him. But that's where it's going. We have aerial warfare. We've got larger military budget than ever with Obama. Larger. He keeps increasing it every year. And that's not because he's spineless. It's not because he's a weak sissy or a pussy or whatever else. It's because that's what he wants to do. That's what he's been pursuing. And new military bases, major bases in Kosovo and Central Asia and other places. Iraq, they call the Green Zone bigger than Vatican City it is, with its own water resources and energy resources and the like. This empire feeds off the Republic, and that's one of the points I make in the book, which is available right over there on that table. And the economy suffers. Military spending is capital intensive, it's heavily subsidized, it creates per dollar many less jobs than transportation or teaching or healthcare or any number of other things that we might want, construction work and the like. The plutocracy also does not want a social democracy with a viable public sector. Not only because of what I said before, they don't want people who are organized, alert, and feeling entitled, self-entitled and so forth. But a not-for-profit sector is a threat to capitalism. They have subsidized housing, they have some other things. They are able to negotiate. Labor is able to often to fight back, you see. And this is something this was something that bothered Ronald Reagan when he was doing cutbacks. He says, the problem is wages are still up, that wages are not down enough. We've got to get them down. A public sector with a social wage demonstrates the viability of public non-profit services. You get them cheaper and you get them better. It deprives capital of accumulation opportunities. It provides market earnings to public budgets. That's a good one that we should all know about. Take utilities, for instance. We have PG&E here. It's a privately owned utility. We pay the highest rates in the United States. They make enormous profits, PG&E. Now, there are a lot of communities where the utilities, the gas and electric, is publicly owned by the municipality or the state. And your rates are lower because you don't have to spend all that other money on advertising, on profits for the shareholders and all, and to compete against other people, and the earnings you make and the public utility goes into the public budget. It goes into the budget and it's used, which means it's easier on your taxes too. But that's just what the plutocrats don't like about that sort of thing. You see, you're demonstrating that you can have production, you can have use, you can have human needs dealt with, you can have money put into the tax ledgers, you can have private consumption and all that, and nobody in your little plutocratic gang is making a profit on it. And it's all cheaper and it's better and it's more reasonable for people. Lower costs and such. Someday we're going to see public ownership of our utilities here. Let us hope. There's a function. The function of the capitalist state is, of course, to make society, make the economy, make the polity safe for this whole accumulation process, to keep people in line, to circumscribe and diminish the demands of the working populace. But there's another function of the capitalist state, I argue. It's seldom mentioned. It consists of preventing the capitalist system from devouring itself, to protect capitalism from the capitalists, to restrain the self-devouring beast, because that's what it is. It eats everything in sight, including its own feet and its own tail and then its own body, you see. An economy dedicated to speed-ups and wage cuts, to making workers produce more and more for less and less, is always in danger of a crash. To maximize profits, wages must be kept down. But someone has to buy the goods and services being produced. For that, wages must be kept up, or you got to be paying out some wages. There's a chronic tendency, as we're seeing today, toward overproduction of private sector goods and services and underconsumption of necessities by the working populace. So what happens in a situation like this is that recessions, destabilizations, imbalances in it are the chronic condition. It's not a crisis. That's the natural condition of capitalism. Crises is the normal condition. Hardly 3 years after the Constitutional Convention ended in September of 1797 in Philadelphia came the recession of 1790. The country under the new Constitution wasn't even 3 years old, okay? And they had a recession. There was the Panic of 1797. There was the recession of 1802 that went on to 1804. There was the Depression of 1807 to 1810. There was about 20 more of these crises, panics, recessions in the 19th century. Most notably, the Long Depression of 1873 that went on to 1879, almost to 1880. 1890, 4 recessions in the 1890s, 1890, 93, 96. 1899, the big one. You know, that was a very troublesome. And what did we need? I tell you what we need. Our boy Teddy Roosevelt told us. He said, this nation needs a war, any war. Yeah, pick it up out of this, you see, get it going. And that's exactly what they did. They picked a fight with Spain, which was weak and had all these nice, ripe, low-hanging colonies, which the U.S. just ripped off and took. Go into the 20th century, 3 recessions in the 1920s. I didn't know about that. All I heard about the 1920s, it was the Jazz-A's, Charleston. Remember that? And everybody was having fun. Then came the Great Crash, 1929, a Great Depression, 29 to 41, pulled out of it by a thing called World War II, and so forth, 29, no, did I say 29 to 41, then 49, 53, 58, and you can go on a number of others. There was the one in Reagan's first term, remember? That was a serious one. So in other words, that's the normal condition of an unregulated capitalism. Crises, and we feel it. We're the ones who get the blows, who have to suffer the blows for this kind of thing. And also, even at the individual level, living in this kind of society, no Americans, except for the super rich 1%, no Americans have complete economic security. The rest of us are never really secure. Investments can go wrong, job loss, illnesses, your 401k becomes a 101k. All sorts of things like that happen. 1 out of 3 Americans over 65 have no teeth. There's no dental insurance. It's not covered by Medicare, I don't think, is it? There's no Medicare. And that explains that statistic then. Isn't that amazing? Under capitalism, we live in our personal recessions, our personal panics and crises. 1 of 2 Americans now are below or barely above the poverty level. You know, the fact that you are $500 above the poverty level doesn't mean you're okay. I mean, it's terrible. The poverty level is determined by simply a sketch that was set out back in the 40s as to what a family of 4, how much it would cost to live in an affordable house, and how much for groceries, and how much for this and this. And
okay, I had to stop it. We're coming back to this now. You see, he's describing what's actually going on with these unregulated capitalists. Now, Alex Jones would tell you exactly how they're doing it, how brutally they're doing it, and how they're using the politicians that they have on their payroll, like Obama, to do it. What techniques they're using. Now, we're going to go into this. This next thing I'm going to play for you is a TED Talk. Now, I contacted the TED people to see if I could play it, and basically they said, we can't really stop you. But if you want to, make sure that you play the entire thing, the beginning, the middle, the end, no editing, no cutting, no overtalks, nothing like that, and then play the entire rollout. So that's what we're going to do. And it's 22 minutes long, so we're going to start it before we get to the end so I don't roll my end credits over it. But here's the point. This is a rich oligarch, and he already acknowledges the same thing Parenti has said. But, you know, if we're going to have to keep capitalism, we ought to at least use a little common sense. So go ahead and roll this one, Dave, and we'll take it from there.
You probably don't know me, but I am one of those 0.01 percenters that you hear about and read about, and I am by any reasonable definition a plutocrat. And tonight, what I would like to do is speak directly to other plutocrats, to my people, because it feels like it's time for us all to have a chat. Like most plutocrats, I too am a proud and unapologetic capitalist. I have founded, co-founded, or funded over 30 companies across a range of industries. I was the first non-family investor in Amazon.com. I co-founded a company called The Quantive that we sold to Microsoft for $6.4 billion. My friends and I, we own a bank. I tell you this, unbelievable, right? I tell you this to show that my life is like most plutocrats. I have a broad perspective on capitalism and business, and I've been rewarded obscenely for that with a life that most of y'all can't even imagine. Multiple homes, a yacht, my own plane, etc., etc., etc. But let's be honest, I am not the smartest person you've ever met. I am certainly not the hardest working. I was a mediocre student. I'm not technical at all. I can't write a word of code. Truly, my success is the consequence of spectacular luck, of birth, of circumstance, and of timing. But I am actually pretty good at a couple of things. One, I have an unusually high tolerance for risk. And the other is, I have a good sense, a good intuition about what will happen in the future. And I think that that intuition about the future is the essence of good entrepreneurship. So what do I see in our future today, you ask? I see pitchforks, as in angry mobs with pitchforks. Because people like us plutocrats, because while people like us plutocrats are living beyond the dreams of avarice, the other 99% of our fellow citizens are falling farther and farther behind. In 1980, the top 1% of Americans shared about 8% of national wealth, while the bottom 50% of Americans shared 18%. 30 years later, today, the top 1% shares over 20% of national wealth, while the bottom 50% of Americans share 12 or 13. If the trend continues, the top 1% will share over 30% of national wealth in another 30 years, while the bottom 50% of Americans will share just 6. You see, the problem isn't that we have some inequality. Some inequality is necessary for a high-functioning capitalist democracy. The problem is that inequality is at historic highs today, and it's getting worse every day. And if wealth, power, and income continue to concentrate at the very tippy top, our society will change from a capitalist democracy to a neo-feudalist rentier society like 18th century France. That was, France before the revolution and the mobs with the pitchforks. So I have a message for my fellow plutocrats and zillionaires, and for anyone who lives in a gated bubble world. Wake up. Wake up. It cannot last. Because if we do not do something to fix the glaring economic inequities in our society, the pitchforks will come for us. For no free and open society can long sustain this kind of rising economic inequality. It has never happened. There are no examples. You show me a highly unequal society and I will show you a police state or an uprising. The pitchforks will come for us if we do not address this. It's not a matter of if, it's when. And it will be terrible when they come for everyone, but particularly for people like us plutocrats. I know I must sound like some liberal do-gooder. I'm not. I'm not making a moral argument that economic inequality is wrong. What I'm arguing is that rising economic inequality is stupid and ultimately self-defeating. Rising inequality doesn't just increase our risks from pitchforks, but it's also terrible for business too. So the model for us rich guys should be Henry Ford. When Ford famously introduced the $5 day, which was twice the prevailing wage at the time, he didn't just increase the productivity of his factories. He converted exploited auto workers who were poor into a thriving middle class who could now afford to buy the products that they made. Ford intuited what we now know is true, that an economy is best understood as an ecosystem and characterized by the same kinds of feedback loops you find in a natural ecosystem. A feedback loop between customers and businesses. Raising wages increases demand, which increases hiring, which in turn increases wages and demand and profits. And that virtuous cycle of increasing prosperity is precisely what is missing from today's economic recovery. And this is why we need to put behind us the trickle-down policies that so dominate both political parties and embrace something I call middle-out economics. Middle-out economics rejects the neoclassical economic idea that economies are efficient, linear, mechanistic, that they tend towards equilibrium and fairness, and instead embraces the 21st century idea that economies are complex, adaptive, ecosystemic, that they tend away from equilibrium and toward inequality, that they're not efficient at all, but are effective if well managed. This 21st century perspective allows you to clearly see that capitalism does not work by effectively allocating existing resources. It works by effectively creating new solutions to human problems. The genius of capitalism is that it is an evolutionary solution-finding system. It rewards people for solving other people's problems. The difference between a poor society and a rich society, obviously, is the degree to which that society has generated solutions in the form of products for its citizens. The sum of the solutions that we have in our society really is our prosperity, and this explains why companies like Google and Amazon and Microsoft and Apple and the entrepreneurs who created those companies have contributed so much to our nation's prosperity. This 21st century perspective also makes clear that what we think of as economic growth is best understood as the rate at which we solve problems. But that rate is totally dependent upon how many problem solvers, diverse, able problem solvers we have, and thus how many of our fellow citizens actively participate, both as entrepreneurs who can offer solutions and as customers who consume them. But this maximizing participation thing doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen by itself. It requires effort and investment, which is why all highly prosperous capitalist democracies are characterized by massive investments in the middle class and the infrastructure that they depend on. We plutocrats need to get this trickle-down economics thing behind us. This idea that the better we do, the better everyone else will do. It's not true. How could it be? I earn 1,000 times the median wage, but I do not buy 1,000 times as much stuff, do I? I actually bought 2 pairs of these pants, what my partner Mike calls my manager pants. I could have bought 2,000 pairs, but what would I do with them? How many haircuts can I get? How often can I go out to dinner? No matter how wealthy a few plutocrats get, we can never drive a great national economy. Only a thriving middle class can do that. There's nothing to be done, my plutocrat friends might say. Henry Ford was in a different time. Maybe we can't do some things. Maybe we can do some things. On June 19th, 2013, Bloomberg published an article I wrote called "The Capitalist Case for a $15 Minimum Wage." The good people at Forbes magazine, among my biggest admirers, called it Nick Hanauer's near insane proposal. And yet, just 350 days after that article was published, Seattle's Mayor Ed Murray signed into law an ordinance raising the minimum wage in Seattle to $15 an hour, more than double what the prevailing federal $7.25 rate is. How did this happen? Reasonable people might ask. It happened because a group of us reminded the middle class that they are the source of growth and prosperity in capitalist economies. We reminded them that when workers have more money, businesses have more customers and need more employees. We reminded them that when businesses pay workers a living wage, taxpayers are relieved of the burden of funding the poverty programs like food stamps and medical assistance and rent assistance that those workers need. We reminded them that low-wage workers make terrible taxpayers, and that when you raise the minimum wage for all businesses benefit, yet all can compete. Now, the orthodox reaction, of course, is raising the minimum wage costs jobs, right? Your politicians always echoing that trickle-down idea by saying things like, well, if you raise the price of employment, guess what happens? You get less of it. Are you sure? Because there's some contravening evidence. Since 1980, the wages of CEOs in our country have gone from about 30 times the median wage to 500 times. That's raising the price of employment. And yet, to my knowledge, I have never seen a company outsource its CEO's job, automate their job, export the job to China. In fact, we appear to be employing more CEOs and senior managers than ever before. So too for technology workers and financial services workers who earn multiples of the median wage, and yet we employ more and more of them. So clearly, you can raise the price of employment and get more of it. I know that most people think that the $15 minimum wage is this insane, risky economic experiment. We disagree. We believe that the $15 minimum wage in Seattle is actually the continuation of a logical economic policy that is allowing our city to kick your city's ass. Because you see, Washington State already has the highest minimum wage of any state in the nation. We pay all workers $9.32, which is almost 30% more than the federal minimum of $7.25, but crucially, 427% more than the federal tipped minimum of $2.13. If trickle-down thinkers were right, then Washington State should have massive unemployment. Seattle should be sliding into the ocean. And yet, Seattle is the fastest growing big city in the country. Washington State is generating small business jobs at a higher rate than any other major state in the nation. The restaurant business in Seattle, booming. Why? Because the fundamental law of capitalism is when workers have more money, businesses have more customers and need more workers. When restaurants pay restaurant workers enough so that even they can afford to eat in restaurants, that's not bad for the restaurant business. That's good for it, despite what some restaurateurs may tell you. Is it more complicated than I'm making out? Of course it is. There are a lot of dynamics at play. But can we please stop insisting that if low-wage workers earn a little bit more, unemployment will skyrocket and the economy will collapse? There is no evidence for it. The most insidious thing about trickle-down economics is not the claim that if the rich get richer, everyone is better off. It is the claim made by those who oppose any increase in the minimum wage that if the poor get richer, that will be bad for the economy. This is nonsense. So can we please dispense with this rhetoric that says that rich guys like me and my plutocrats friends made our country? We plutocrats know, even if we don't like to admit it in public, that if we had been born somewhere else, not here in the United States, we might very well be just some dude standing barefoot by the side of a dirt road selling fruit. It's not that they don't have good entrepreneurs in other places, even very, very poor places. It's just that that's all that those entrepreneurs, customers can afford. So here's an idea for a new kind of economics, a new kind of politics that I call new capitalism. Let's acknowledge that capitalism beats the alternatives, but also that the more people we include, both as entrepreneurs and as customers, the better it works. Let's by all means shrink the size of government. but not by slashing the poverty programs, but by ensuring that workers are paid enough so that they actually don't need those programs. Let's invest enough in the middle class to make our economy fairer and more inclusive, and by fairer, more truly competitive. And by more truly competitive, more able to generate the solutions to human problems that are the true drivers of growth and prosperity. Capitalism is the greatest social technology ever invented for creating prosperity in human societies if it is well managed. But capitalism, because of the fundamental multiplicative dynamics of complex systems, tends towards, inexorably, inequality, concentration, and collapse. The work of democracies is to maximize the inclusion of the many in order to create prosperity, not to enable the few to accumulate money. Government does create prosperity and growth by creating the conditions that allow both entrepreneurs and their customers to thrive. Balancing the power of capitalists like me and workers isn't bad for capitalism, it's essential to it. Programs like a reasonable minimum wage, affordable health care, paid sick leave, and the progressive taxation necessary to pay for the important infrastructure necessary to the middle class, like education, R&D. These are indispensable tools shrewd capitalists should embrace to drive growth, because no one benefits from it like us. Many economists would have you believe that their field is an objective science. I disagree. And I think that it is equally a tool that humans use to enforce and encode our social and moral preferences and prejudices about status and power. Which is why plutocrats like me have always needed to find persuasive stories to tell everyone else about why our relative positions are morally righteous and good for everyone. Like, we are indispensable, the job creators, and you are not. Like, tax cuts for us create growth, but investments in you will balloon our debt and bankrupt our great country. That we matter, that you don't. For thousands of years, these stories were called divine right. Today, we have trickle-down economics. How obviously, transparently self-serving all of this is. We plutocrats need to see that the United States of America made us, not the other way around. That a thriving middle class is the source of prosperity in capitalist economies, not a consequence of it. And we should never forget that even the best of us, in the worst of circumstances, are barefoot by the side of a dirt road selling fruit. Fellow plutocrats, I think it may be time for us to recommit to our country, to commit to a new kind of capitalism which is both more inclusive and more effective. A capitalism that will ensure that America's economy remains the most dynamic and prosperous in the world. Let's secure the future for ourselves, our children, and their children. Or alternatively, we could do nothing. Hide in our gated communities and private schools, enjoy our planes and yachts, they're fun, and wait for the pitchforks. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I thought there were some credits, so I was ready to let those credits roll. Anyway, apparently I have to get a license if I let the, if I wanted to play the TED thing every week or whatever, or every month, however often they do it. But isn't it interesting that a socialist and a avowed capitalist said the same thing? Exactly the same thing. So it's kind of interesting to note that Seattle elected a socialist and in their city council, and also they got that $15 an hour minimum wage going, and now, like the man said, they have the best growth of small businesses and so on. So it looks like we don't have to destroy the system. Some of you radicals out there that might be calling for that, it looks like maybe we can work it out so that you have a decent life. I don't really give a hoot if somebody is filthy rich. I don't really care. It's not for me. Maybe it's for somebody else, but the power that goes with it is ridiculous. So I'm kind of on Michael Parenti's side. You can see his work at michaelparenti.org. That's P-A-R-E-N-T-I, Michael Parenti. And of course, the TED Talks, you can Google TED Talks and you'll go right to it. And some of them are really pretty interesting. This one was recommended to me by Don Baham, who does his show Conversations with Dr. Don. In no way affiliated or agrees with what I say necessarily, but he showed me this TED Talk that we're doing here. Now, I was thinking of showing you the clip of Alex Jones ranting and going down the list of stuff. I told you 2 years ago that this was going to happen, and now it is. And I told you 1997 that this was going to happen. Ah! Well, you got to remember Alex Jones is trying to fill a time slot, for all his radio and TV stations that he's on. And the one thing that you can say, though, is that the Alex Jones show is great on breaking news, especially when they send their own reporters there, and you get continuous live coverage so that nobody gets to spin it. And, of course, you say, well, Alex Jones gives you that dire predictions. Well, his predictions exactly match both of the people that were talking on my show today, both Michael Parenti and Nick, was it Nick Hanauer? I think I got that right. Anyway, just Google TED Talks. The pitchforks are coming. That's what we just played. But both of those guys have the same viewpoint as Alex Jones about what's happening. So... Well, anyway, next week, we're going to be on the 6th. Now, that's just a few days before the 11th, and I'm going to tell you all the events that we're going to come up for the 13th anniversary of 2001, the 9/11 event. So, see you then. Enjoy.